Hello, seniors and parents of seniors. Since this pandemic started in what feels now was decades ago, most of our world has been forever changed, and in many cases, it has been turned upside down. For you seniors, the college admissions process has not been the exception, and the ever changing landscape that has resulted has many of you feeling anxious, confused, lost, worried, and perhaps all of the above. Over the past few months, and in particular in recent weeks, we have been getting calls, emails, texts from seniors, from parents, even from people outside our community who are facing these daunting challenges and are trying to figure out how this pandemic will affect their college admission strategy this year. We're always looking to do more, and we know that there's everyone can benefit from more clarity in these times. That's why we're here today. We feel very strongly that the best resources that we have for you at this time are Ms. DJ Meehan, our college director, our college admissions director, and Dr. Mark Bowen, our college counselor, who are top experts in the field of college admissions, and they have experience that could be a real treasure at this time. They have a network that allows them to consult other people who are experts and admissions officers from the top institutions in the USA, in Europe, and Asia, and could provide all of you some very much needed guidance at this time. We want our seniors and their parents to know that we have empathy for you. We know that this is a very difficult time, and it's an important decision that we're making in what is probably the most complex year in our lives. So, our goal is to give you the best guidance possible so you can make informed decisions. We acknowledge that each one of you is different, and the needs, the plans, and the goals will consequently be also different. So we're not, it's very important that everyone understands that we're not trying to provide you with a one size fits all solution. We're not trying to tell you what to do. We're not even expecting our students to follow the exact same path. We're simply sharing information, trying to help you as a school to explain our rationale for some of the decisions that we have made, and try to provide you with the supporting evidence so you know where our decisions come from. Our hope is that the information that we will present to you today will benefit you as much as possible. It's important to address the elephant in the room, and that is that many seniors are debating as to whether or not they should take the SAT or the ACT for admission in 2021. We know that historically, the standardized tests have been a key component of the admissions process, and many of you have been invested in preparing for these tests. The thought that this is not going to weigh in this process can be very distressing and very disheartening. For a lot of others, the mere just worrying about how will colleges effectively appraise you as candidates without test results can be very, very challenging. Or just those of you who worry because you have made a decision and you agree that for your particular agenda and your particular plans, there's a clear path, but then you still have some unanswered questions that could help you get some clarity. So it is important to acknowledge that COVID-19 has significantly affected the ability of students around the globe to take tests. And the colleges and universities are keenly aware of this fact. They know that for most students, taking the SAT this year entails a combination of things that make it very difficult, if not impossible, for some students. They know it's not reasonable to expect that all students will take the tests and that much less will do well given the circumstances. So that's the reason why so many colleges and universities have become test optional for 2021. I want to jump ahead and make sure that we want to let you know that our families, in particular to the students in our community, as well as anyone else who hears this conversation today, that our goal is to alleviate the pressure that you're feeling today. We're trying to do our best to clear that uncertainty, and just give you some information that will help you make an informed decision. So with that in mind, I want to introduce my good friend DJ Meehan, our Director of College Admissions. We're going to have a conversation today with two very special guests. And DJ, we hopefully will be able to bring some clarity and perhaps help many of our families and anyone who hears our message about what to do for this year. So DJ.
Chévere. Thank you, David. Y buenos días. Good morning, everybody. I am honored and so grateful to have two esteemed admissions colleagues with us today. Giselle Martin from Emory University. She is the Director of Talent and Recruitment. And Paul Sunde, who is with us today from Dartmouth College up in Hanover, New Hampshire. He is hanging out looking at the colors up in Vermont these days. Thank you guys for being here. I know, actually, no, I don't know. I can't imagine what it is to be an enrollment manager in 2020. So I salute you and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for the time that you've taken to be with us today so that we can talk a little bit to our families and our community about this new landscape that we're entering in, right? This kind of mythical test optional admission cycle that we're about to enter into. I was thinking about this this morning, listening to to the news and thinking about why this has been maybe such a challenge for us as a community of educators on the college, high school side to communicate to families. Is it because we're living in a larger culture where it's hard to trust, right? Everywhere, right? It's really hard to trust. And for my whole life, right, since I was in high school and since I've been doing this work in admissions, in large part we've been told, right, the popular rhetoric is that these test scores matter, right, and that they are a part of this formula. And all of a sudden, right, we're being told that no, like magically, right, this test optional thing is going to happen and we should trust it. Those of us in the profession, we know, right, that for 30 years since Bates, made that harrowing decision in the 80s and started collecting data, and other institutions started, sort of watching that test optional thing. We've watched it. It's like a snowball. It's been coming. And, when Chicago said that a couple of years ago, Chicago went test optional, I was like, wow, this is crazy. But it's not new to us, is I guess what I'm saying. But still, in spite of that, it's still to most families entering this process, that is the expectation, right? The testing does matter. And then there's folks that are screaming fake news, saying that, that's not true, that it is still going to matter, that you all are just saying things are test optional, right? But that if some people can take this test, those are the ones that are going to be competitive in this process, right? This isn't the case. That's what they're screaming. And so it's understandable and kind of heartbreaking, right, that our families are confused because it is hard to believe, right? Something that is so new and coming up left field. So I'm grateful to talk to you guys a little bit. This is a new paradigm for your admissions offices. You are both highly selective schools, who are putting your toe now into this test optional pool. And yeah, I'd love if you could just share a little perspective on what this really means, right? On how you all are sort of looking forward and taking it day to day, right? And figuring it out. But, what is the plan? How do we explain this to a family? How is Emory, Giselle, going to read test optional in this reading cycle?
Well, first and foremost, thank you, David, thank you, DJ and Mark, and your whole wonderful crew for having us today. I'm happy to be here, aunque sea de lejos. Estoy en espíritu en Puerto Rico, so thank you for having us. This is a different year for not just college admissions, not just college enrollments, but this is a different year in family life, in humanity, in perspective, in really kind of like the pivotal foundations of like who we are as a society. I think we are all kind of pushed to redefine community and what matters in a very, very purposeful and personal way this year. For that, I think I will always be thankful to 2020 because I think a lot of people in the past have put that time of reflection on the back burner or have let sort of the masses dictate what matters most. And you can't do that this year. It has become very personal. I will tell you from, to your point, DJ, the question that you asked about test optional, this has been a question that our Emory admission staff literally has been discussing for all summer long in a multitude of conversations. Every single person on our staff had a voice at that table to make that decision to go test optional. And it was approved all the way up to the Board of Trustees and the president of the university because of what we saw, such a major public health, public good, public awareness, humanitarian decision that needed to be made for us. This is a virus that nobody anticipated. And for us to even remotely make a request for a test that is 3 hours, and you would potentially have to put yourself in a situation that is dangerous to your health to take, that just didn't seem like the right thing to do for us as an institution that talks about our mission to improve the human condition. So that was why we decided to go test optional. And we could talk a little bit more about what that really means in our review process, because that is a conversation that of course we had to have, right? The decision has repercussions in how we make our decisions, but ultimately we've always been an institution that is a truly holistic review process. We're looking at your full story as a student, right? Where you started from, how you got here, what you dream of, what you hope of, and quite frankly, where you make your investments in your academic curriculum in your school. You've made the investment to be at St. John's or another institution that you might be attending as a family or sibling in your household, because you trust in the education that institution is putting forth for you. That day-to-day commitment of what you're doing every day, what you're learning, what you're soaking in, the faculty, the teachers, the mentors, the staff, that school community, that matters now more than ever, because that's your commitment to your everyday personal growth and journey. And that has always been the most important thing in our process. And this year, it's even more so important.
Paul, tell us a little bit about, how Dartmouth came to the decision to be test optional.
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for hosting me here with you today. It is a pleasure and honor to join you. And when this opportunity came up for me, it was an obvious and easy decision to participate. This is a very, very important conversation. And so I applaud your having it in this way and including the voices that you're including. One of the things that I think about, and I have done this work for 30 years at different institutions, all of them very selective. And I really appreciate the way you've framed things for us, Giselle. I mean, why do we do this work? It is because we care for young people and we care about supporting them as they map and embark on their futures. So there is a humanitarian drive to people who work in this field. Everyone that I know who works in this field cares deeply about the students and families with whom they work. And, for us, I think there's a real similarity to what you have already heard, just in terms of this is a global and kind of epic a crisis of dimensions that no one who is alive has experienced. And therefore, everything must change. I mean, if we think about our daily lives and routines, who among us hasn't made dramatic changes in their lives, whatever their work is and whatever their family dynamic is. And so that it would affect the admissions process, the selection process, is entirely understandable. And I think when I think about what is it that we are trying to do as we develop a first-year class, the values that inform our process are bedrock. And we have a variety of tools at our disposal for a variety of applicants, because it is a global pool. There are more than 8,000 secondary schools represented in the pool. All of those students are coming from different communities, different schools, different curricula, different grading systems, and different testing patterns, frankly. And for some, I think that is an argument that, well, having this one common test across that pool helps you. And well, if we think back on this, and in prior years, that one common test itself was different because of the different communities and the different languages spoken and the different opportunities to prepare for the exam, and so on and so forth. So even in looking at scores, while an exam was a singular mechanism, its interpretation was highly dependent upon context. And so now for many applicants, and we cannot know for how many, we will not have scores. And for us, we were entirely open-eyed about that in making the decision that on two fronts. The first being one of, let's keep our priorities straight about what we're here to do. There are things far more important in all of our lives than the taking of an exam or the interpretation of an exam's results. So that's one. Two, we have a robust and resilient selection process. We have been engaged in holistic admissions at Dartmouth for 100 years. And for some of that time, we've had an SAT or an ACT. For some of that time, we haven't. And for some of that time, it's been a localized pool. For some of that time, it's been global. The pool has changed. The features of the candidacies have changed. But the spirit of holistic admissions has remained. And just as you've heard, sort of the values that we come back to in a moment like this, well, we come back to the values of holistic admission. And I am 100% convinced, whether we have a score for a student or we do not have a score for a student, we will be able to answer the essential questions of our process. And to be very specific about this, what does this candidate care most about? What are the things about which they are most excited and to which they are most committed? And what kinds of choices have they made? And choice is a function of context, right? And if the exam is not available in one's context, or it's a challenge to take an exam, as you've already heard, well, that limits your choice. But what have you done, given what you care most about? How have you succeeded? What are the accomplishments of which you're most proud? And how have you engaged and impacted others? How have you engaged with your community? Those handful of essential questions, none of them are, what is the score that an applicant has on a test? They run deeper than that. So our process is built to go below the top line data, whatever that top line data is, and to understand a student's motivations and their energy, and again, the way that they are a citizen of their learning community and a citizen of their broader community. And so those fundamental questions and the fundamental values that drive our process, whether we have an exam or not, I'm 100% confident we are going to be able to answer the questions that we need to answer and build the class we need to build.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm always sort of touched to remember, right? And one of the reasons I love this profession is when I'm reminded of, sort of the heart that sort of informs this mess, this crazy circus that that we work in, right? At the end of the day, ultimately, what we're looking out for is the kids in this process, and it's always affirming to hear you guys, know that you guys are looking out for them. Practically, I mean, again, and I know you can't do this, but practically though, I'm still coming from the skeptic side. All things being equal, there are applicants with testing and applicants without testing. I have this perception that I'm just automatically not going to be competitive against a candidate who otherwise, is comparable, but is bringing strong testing to the table. Is that true?
So I'll lead on that and feel free to add.
Yeah.
So the all things being equal construct is one that I hear often, and and I always think to myself, so I'll say it out loud here: all things are never equal. The applicant pool is so diverse, and even within individual communities, the individuals are so varied in all of, and I don't mean in all of the aspects of their candidacy. An application, when fully assembled, is typically 30 to 40 pages long. There is so much that is in there. And I mean, so with so many variables, to say we're going to say each page is one variable. So 39 variables are all going to be the same, and this one is different. That's never the case. There are always multiple variations in there. And different candidacies always have different strengths and weaknesses, as well as different information available to us or not available to us. And so our readers are incredibly adept, and it's what we train them for, is to say, you need to take disparate data points from different applicants and distill that into an understandable summary for your colleagues, and then present that case in its completeness to your colleagues. We are trained to be incredibly flexible, and so the all things being equal is a challenging concept, but I understand why people use that, and I fully expect that we are going to see some with exams and some without. But where we will go is, again, below that level, and is more information better than less information in that way? Not necessarily, if what we're trying to get at is what is underneath that information. What's the deeper intellectual drive that a student brings? And I think so much about this point about why is it that you make the decisions that you do? And it is those deeper qualities that students exhibit. When we are ultimately making decisions, we're not talking about GPAs. We're not talking about test scores or rank in class. We're not talking about the number of advanced courses that a student has taken. We're talking about why that student has done those things with the class choices, and how they have engaged as members of an intellectual community, as members of a broader community. And we're imagining, what might that student be like within our community? That's the basis of the decision-making process. Are those top-line features important in this process, and is having more elements to your top line better in this process? And what I would say is, when a candidate makes the transition from a potential admitted student to somebody who's very competitive for being selected in our process, They're making that transition in large part because they have shown the academic preparedness, the intellectual appetite for the work that we have to do, or that our students are doing. Can students illustrate that without an exam score? Like to me, that's how I hear your question. And the answer to that is absolutely. We have a student's whole transcript, 3.5 years of work, and the course pattern and the grades. We have students' recommendations that attest to a student's presence in the classroom and the way they engage their assignments. That is a rich, robust treasure trove, again, that will enable us to answer the question. So whether a student is adding to a pile of great data with some more data or not, we're going to have what we need. And so more is not necessarily better, is my point. So all things aren't equal, and more doesn't necessarily help a student answer a question that we have the material to answer otherwise. So I'll leave it there and let you
beautiful.
go
Thank you, Paul. Giselle, cuéntame.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I'm in full agreement. I was trying to think through, like, okay, because I've been getting this question a lot, because DJ, you're right. There's a lot of skeptics out there. There's a lot of people that do not believe what universities are saying. There are a lot of people that, well, at the end of the day, they also want the best for their kids, period. Este es tu niño, tu nena. You want the very best for them. But at what cost is, I guess, the question. I keep going back to, this process works when there is trust and there is integrity with both the universities as well as the families that are making these considerations. The pact is that we're both going into this process trusting in ourselves, that we're going to do this ethically, that we're going to be doing this with integrity, that we're going to be looking at our best interests, but also doing good, right? To me, that's just a standard code. That's how I wake up every single day to think about how I approach the rest of my day and the work that we do. And so, I was trying to think, okay, if I was sitting in your shoes, and maybe this is where, like, my caribeña comes out, I'm going to shift the conversation a little tiny bit in a different direction. Let's say I'm a parent, right? And I run a business. And I'm reviewing resumes for candidates because I really need somebody to come into my organization that's going to really take my organization to that next level, right? I also really like croquetas, okay? And so there's some candidates, you look at the resume, you met them in person, and you have all of their credentials, you have all of their backgrounds, you've seen where they've worked before, you've heard their references, and you already have, like, that gut feeling, like, oye, esta buena gente. And then there's a couple of candidates that you reviewed that, they look great on paper, but when you had that interview with them or you read some things that they wrote, you're like, algo que como que the purpose, or like what they're telling me and what's on paper, como que no empatan. It's not the same thing. And that person that I'm a little bit shaky on, all of a sudden brings me, like, the most amazing croquetas ever. That's still not going to shift how I feel about the potential that they have to improve and fit into the culture of the organization. that I'm running, right? And you live in Puerto Rico, so there's a lot of croqueta options, right? So that I don't know if that lands in the same way, but I think that the main point there is that you got to trust your gut, and you have to have integrity in this process in order for it to be authentic. And I say that in a time knowing that, I've been covering Puerto Rico actually from my days back in IBM in early, or late 1990s to my transition into higher education in 2000 for a long time. And so I read the news. I know what's going on in the island. And I know that there's an executive order right now that has basically shut things down at least until October 16th. And I'm thinking, if I was a person thinking about the public good, thinking about my community and public health, would I be putting somebody that I love and respect, my son, my daughter, my child, my student, in a position where they would be doing something that is kind of outside the regulations that the government also has sort of put in place? I don't know that I would, when the universities are essentially saying, look, there's a lot of other things that you're doing every single day in your academic curriculum, in your family life, that matter, that are so important to who you are and who you're building as a person. So, yeah, do your APs. Spend more time before your Zoom calls with your teachers, with your counselors, afterwards, getting to know them, talking to them about what's going on, about what you're seeing, what matters to you. Because ultimately, that is what we're looking for, is that sense of, that this is all bigger than yourself, right? That's what education and higher education that is really all about, is to think about something bigger than yourself. And 2020 has proven that is something that we all, as a global society, need to be doing more of.
Thank you, Giselle. It's perfect. One last question, because I don't want to belabor this. This is actually just kind of related to a point we were making kind of offline before we got started. The 2020 is also the year of reinvention, right? And that's something I'm just curious to just get your 20-second take. What does the future look like? Do you think that beyond this year? We've been advising our younger families not to prioritize test prep. No need, because at this moment, we don't know what the future looks like. Maybe it's more important to, stay focused on grades and stay focused on what we know matters, even if we're in 10th grade or in 11th grade. Any future predictions from where you guys sit, Paul or Giselle? Paul, I'll put
you put me on the spot. Okay. I think that's a great question. If this year has taught us anything, it's that the unexpected is more likely to occur than you would have thought. It seems that every day brings news of some kind or another that is surprising and unexpected. And so in a world where one cannot predict, I think it brings us back to, or hopefully brings us back to, kind of the bedrock truths that have stood the test of time, and the importance of investing in family, the importance of investing in community, the importance of investing in one's own intellectual and personal growth. Like those three things, they have been true forever. They will be true, whatever the world brings to us. And Giselle, I really appreciate your comments. They resonate for me very deeply. And I feel like I've learned from you today, and that's wonderful. So thank you. And so when I look to the future, what will happen with testing requirements at various schools? I can tell you where Dartmouth is, and what I know from colleagues at peer institutions that have said, we are doing this for the humanitarian reasons that Giselle has so articulately outlined for you, and the fact that some students will have them and some students won't, and we have to respect that, and we have to work with that. In a year when testing becomes more widely available, we'll then revisit these decisions and say, what shall we do going forward? But for students, what does that mean? Invest in your classes, challenge yourself, and invest in your families and your communities. I mean, those will be true whatever decisions schools are making. And my guess is that there will be more schools that are test optional in 2021 than there were schools that are test optional in 2019. But if we look ahead to the college search, I don't think that will be as important as what has always been most important in looking for colleges is, do they offer the academic program that excites me? Is that place, is that community one where I can see myself? Are those people my people? Those kinds of questions will be true in the college search. And maybe some of those schools that mean that for you, if you're a year or two out, if there are some of those schools that answer those questions to your satisfaction and you're excited about them, and some of them are test optional and some of them are not, you'll navigate it. In the United States alone, there are 4,000 schools, colleges and universities that offer bachelor's degrees, and that's just the US. There are tremendous array of choices out there. And I think, for this year and for future years, the kind of idea of identifying a range of schools that resonate for you at different levels of selectivity and with different admissions requirements, that's true this year. It was true last year. It will be true next year.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. You're a hard act to follow.
Sorry.
I love it. I love it. This is it's a very good question because when I think about 2020 and DJ, your question was really focused on the future, and I'll definitely talk about that. But I think interestingly enough, what 2020 has actually taught me is to actually be present. Be very, very present. There always have been, and there will always be so many distractions. Some distractions are really close all the time. And so it has forced me to value time and people and love and kindness and grace in a really, really meaningful way. Okay, sorry, I'm going to move on to something that for the future. Now, when I think ahead, in the context of the world that we're living in, and we're talking about education, right? Whether it's K-12 education, higher education, life information, and education. Because learning doesn't only happen in the classroom. I think about the investment of being present in time right now. I don't see it in, and maybe I should say this is my personal opinion, not the opinion of Emory University. So I'm going to put that caveat there. But I don't know that spending time studying to these big tests are where I would make a time investment. On the flip side, however, I think about the transitions of so many talented students, regardless of their previous test in the past, that talk about that transition from the very best high schools in the country and in the world into our universities is a big learning curve, that they're not always prepared to have an opinion based on a multitude of different perspectives, right? And so if anything, my recommendation to be prepared for a future in college admissions arena is spend this time understanding how to study. Spend this time on, if you're going to hire somebody, how to actually take the subject matter that you're learning in your classrooms right now. How do you elevate those conversations? How do you go deeper on the subjects, the ones that you love and are passionate about, and the ones that don't come easy to you? How do you build those muscles to be prepared to take you to that next level of thinking and analysis and synthesis, so that when you go on to all the wonderful universities that are out there in the US and beyond, you're prepared to intellectually engage in discourse that matters, not just based on opinion, based on the wealth of information and facts that you have gathered. I would focus your time on that. The other piece that I would really think to be prepared for a better future is, listen, I'm going to talk about something that not all of us want to talk about out loud, but it is the reality of our culture and our society, regardless of where we call home geographically, and that is mental health. 2020 has put onto the map the fact that we are all vulnerable. And we have to, as a society, as a culture, as a family, need to really discuss this more openly with one another. Invest time in folks that know how to nurture us from the inside out. Because this is a new era for us. And in order to be prepared for the future, we have got to start inside and be very, very candid about what is truly happening, how we are connecting or feeling disconnected. And what does that mean, right? How can we make improvements on that? That's not going to look the same for every single person, right? And so those investments, I think, will go a long way. The other piece too is, quite frankly, now more than ever, there are so many subjects that are on the table and being discussed. From race to culture to immigration to social justice to health to history to finances to tax codes to all types of elements, the arts, right? Think about what makes you comfortable. Think about what makes you uncomfortable in those topics. Spend that time, invest that time exploring that. Because I'll tell you what, if you explore that now, you're going to be searching for a community, just like Paul said, where you're going to want to and truly know who are your people, who are the people you want to actually talk about these topics with, who are the universities that set those topics apart and make them top priority, where you can engage in action, in humanity, and in purpose-driven life. That's where the time investment for the future, to me, right now, is most critical. Definitely not in test preps for the unknown.
I think there should be a mic drop. Can we like cut? Vicente la comiste. I don't know that there's much more to say after that. No, but I do feel like I learned a lot this morning. And so grateful for what you all shared.
Yeah,
Okay?
Thank you.
Likewise, it was a real pleasure. And Giselle, I really appreciate your comments and your thoughts. And it was wonderful to meet everybody. And again, thanks for including us in this. And best to your students and your families. And I whatever we can do to be helpful during this time, we want to do whatever we can. But I wish you well with that.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
So good to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Hi guys,
Thank you very
thank you.
much.
Y hablamos. Beso,
Bye.
gracias. Chévere. Thank you all for your time and being with us today and these reps. We've also compiled a handful of other interviews with college admissions folks at other selected institutions. Dr. Bode and I have been having conversations almost daily with admissions folks. And these were just a couple of the interviews that we collected in the last couple of days that we thought might also be useful for you all to sort of take in as part of this issue.
As of last year, and I will start with that, we were test optional for architecture and music. So this is nothing new to us. So as COVID came around, of course, the first topic of conversation was regarding SAT and ACT testing. Once, of course, we were done with AP testing, which was the first thing discussed, I'm sorry. And that went through and AP tests were able to be taken and scores have come in, which is very exciting. Then, of course, SAT and ACT testing. Because we were already test optional for architecture and music, it was somewhat of an easy transition for us and somewhat of a no-brainer, because how fabulous to be able to give students that opportunity of not having to rely on test scores or not having to worry about these test scores as part of the admission process. There are students that are wonderful test takers. There are students that we know are not wonderful test takers. So I think this sets out the field and kind of, puts everyone at the same level field for the admission process. We have no expectations for students when it comes to testing. If a student wants to apply with testing scores, with their SAT or ACT scores, fine. Truth be told, they will not, absolutely not be at any advantage if they decide to do so. We are truly, truly test optional for both admission and scholarship purposes, which is really important. Yeah. Not only for admission, but for scholarships. If a student wants to submit test scores again, because they believe that they got these good test scores and that they're an accurate reflection of their academic, potential, please submit them. I mean, don't hold back if you've already taken them. If not, then don't. Absolutely don't. It's totally up to the student, and we would encourage students to discuss those strategies with you and with DJ before they go ahead and decide to do so or not. We have been at an increase in the amount of applications that we receive. And again, last year we were able to get a taste of what it was to be truly test optional in 2 schools, which was, as I previously mentioned, architecture and music, and we had excellent results. So now this test optional is for all schools and colleges, which is, again, I think a huge, I can't stress this enough, a huge advantage to all students. So we're really looking forward to that.
Excellent. But I understand the anxiety, right? I think that they need to trust us to know that we understand Puerto Rico in the college applicant population, and we're always going to rely on the rigor and how they've performed. You know, the same message we're given year after year. And the other thing I think people are forgetting is, and I think this is on the colleges, honestly, you look at last year's applicant pool and who got admitted in the bands. Those bands you can throw out the window, those testing bands, because they don't apply this year.
Right.
So what do you have left? You have the GPAs. And as I tell my colleagues, well, my big colleague, I said, you know, Bowdoin has been doing this for years. This isn't new. This is not, what are we going to do? It just means that we're going to have to start reading earlier.
Yep.
And
more carefully.
More carefully.
It's going to take more time.
And hopefully get more, if possible, detail either from a counselor, a teacher letter, or from a school profile, or something that gives you confidence that 93, 97 is worth something. Mm-hmm. And then you go with it. You go with what the rest of the file tells you. So I just don't think that you know, if you, all the testing does is simplify it. And I don't think that we're talking about, in our goal is to make it so simple that it's such a formula. Because, you know, I think you may recall that a young woman for a year or two ago, I forget already, I think we deferred her, then we took her regular, and you were like, she's the real deal, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's what counts. Like, who, yeah. You know, you support all your students because they all can do the work, quite honestly. Some will struggle a bit more, some gonna whatever. But at the end of the day, you're thinking who really is the one who is most aligned with our particular way of teaching or our particular community.
I will never, I mean, through the 3 places that I've worked, University of Miami, Rice, here, the students that have stayed with me, the students that I have met, there are students who have stayed with me that I've never met in person. And it's sort of the fuel behind this job for me. But I will never remember what their test score was. In the end, when everything just shakes out, but I remember their narrative. I remember the story they shared. I remember the stories they were willing to share. I remember, and I don't even always remember what exactly the story was, but I remember how it made me feel. I can't remember what authors or such have said that, but I absolutely subscribe to, you know, it's people won't remember what you say. They're going to remember how they felt when you said it. And there was one particular instance for me where I realized how true that was. I had been a couple of years into this role here at Caltech, and a prospective student came to visit, and I was sitting with them, and the student said, "I remember you from Rice, and I remember what you like." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Of all the things these students are thrown at, you know, the information thrown at them. So I think it's just so unfortunate that I hope that this at least gives you just enough a moment of pause around the frenzy of testing, and for what it's worth, it's in the end, it's just not the thing that matters.
It has come to my attention that basically there is no testing in Puerto Rico, legal testing that will be happening this year. And you know what? That's okay. We will review your application as a test optional school, as we have decided to be here at Brown for this upcoming year. Test optional means just that, test optional. You don't have them? No hay problema. Keep going. We will review it without it. You're a lot more than a number, and I'm well aware of that. Not just because I'm Boricua, like many of you, but also because you're coming from a great institution. And while we're not going to have that testing, it's actually going to be kind of cool, because what it will allow us to do is to really focus our holistic review on all the other parts of the application. That hasn't changed. We will continue to do our holistic review of an application, taking into account where you're from, the resources you've had, the classes that have been at your disposal at St. John's, the changes that you had to undergo, post-COVID in particular, and how do you express yourself? So I implore you to keep your health and safety number one.